The end of a fight. The end of an era. The end of a Goku? It's Dragon Ball Dissection. More specifically, we have reached the final installment of the 12th annual Dragon Ball Dissection December. It's the final day of a year, so it seems appropriate that we are covering the final episode of Dragon Ball GT today. You can't get much more final than that. I don't see the need for too much preamble, let's just get right into it. Episode 64 of Dragon Ball GT is arguably the most well-known episode of the series. Briefly, the fight with Yi Shenlong is over. The real Shenlong appears. He allows Goku to make one more wish to revive those killed in this conflict. However, it will be the last time the Dragon Balls are used. Goku heads off with Shenlong, saying goodbyes to some of his friends along the way. Then the two of them disappear forever along with the Dragon Balls. 100 years later, however, Son Goku briefly reappears at the Tenkaichi Budokai to see his descendant fight. I struggled with how to structure this video, and that's partly because there is both a lot to talk about and very little to talk about. To try to make that a bit clearer, there's not much to describe about the episode. As you can see from my synopsis, in terms of the broad strokes of what happens, it's not all that much. I don't mean this in a negative sense, but not a lot happens. But on the flip side, there's plenty to say about the episode, if you catch my meaning. And that's what I had to struggle with, deciding what to talk about. The episode contains plenty of small moments that are of interest but don't necessarily tie into any larger point, at least not without making this video run about an hour long. Let me throw out a few examples. And by few, I mean that you will see that I clearly can't count to a few. When Goku and Kuririn are talking about the old days, Kuririn starts skipping stones. A nice bit of business that's a nod to them doing the same thing in the same location in Dragon Ball Z Episode 2. Kuririn is alive, which was the whole thing that set this storyline into motion, and it's never addressed how he's able to come back to life when he's already had his go-around with the single-use Dragon Balls. There's also no appearance by his family, despite that connection being the only thing even hypothetically compelling about the scenario. In fact, they appear very early in the arc, only to vanish with no explanation. For all the illogical messes resulting in Piccolo dead and in hell forever, this ending demonstrates it might be a good fit for him. Keeping the peace against rowdy ne'er-do-wells certainly seems more entertaining for him than sitting around in peace. Truly, it is better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Yamcha, Puar, Tenshinhan, and Chaozu make cameo appearances. They don't talk. Goku doesn't visit them. In fact, Goku flying over them seems to remind him that there are actually people he does want to see. And that's despite Furuya Toru actually appearing in this episode to reprise his role as Goku Jr.'s friend, Puck. And that reminds me that when I covered the GT special earlier this year, I referred to Furuya as a national treasure. Actually, that was a typo. What I meant to say was national disgrace. Yeah, don't ask me to pick your lotto numbers because I clearly can't see into the future. As this episode does serve as a follow-up to the GT special, and yes, this episode aired several months after the GT special in case you're new here, it gives them a chance to specify that Goku Jr. is actually Goku's great-great-great-great-grandson, which would make Pan Goku Jr.'s great-great-grandmother. I swear that the Goku Jr. and Vegeta Jr. fight reuses assets from the Goten and Trunks fight. Did you know in the original broadcast of the montage of memorable moments from Dragon Ball history, the show included as a tribute a major cast and crew role for the entire franchise that subsequent re-airings and re-releases did away with? And that Seed of Might painstakingly recreated it for their release of Dragon Ball GT because the fans always do things far better? And did you know that during that montage, GT redraws the scene of Goku and Goten meeting for the first time, rather than using the footage from Dragon Ball Z? Presumably because they didn't want to leave fans with a bunch of subpar latter-day Last House animation? I didn't even know that until today, as I'm writing this! And that's thanks to the eagle-eyed hosts of We Got a Podcast, which I appeared on as a guest last year. I could go on forever, baby, but you probably get the point. There are a lot of little things that are interesting, but just don't really lend themselves to an overall look. Like, I'm sure somebody could or probably has done a whole video on what Piccolo staying in hell says about his character or whatever, but it doesn't really have much relevance to the ending of GT. It's just kind of a thing that happens in the background and then the show moves on from it. But that's not really what I want to get into today. This is the ending to Dragon Ball GT. It was essentially the end of animated Dragon Ball for years, and even now is chronologically still the final word of animated Dragon Ball. I'm trying to be very specific here, so Dragon Ball Online fans, please don't come after me. Oh geez, what about Super Dragon Ball Heroes? Does it do anything? I don't know, let's just move on. I'd like to examine the ending from that perspective. Amid all the visits and cameos and flashbacks and flash-forwards, the main thrust of this episode is that Goku and the Dragon Balls both leave permanently. Well, semi-permanently. Goku can apparently come back on occasion to catch his favorite sports match. And apparently the Dragon Balls, as Trunks surmises, do come back eventually, explaining their presence in the GT special. However, the episode is fairly coy about what actually happens. Goku and Shenlong seem to have an agreement between them that nobody else knows about. Multiple characters stammer out, "Goku, are you..." without finishing the thought. The Dragon Balls are absorbed into Goku's body and he disappears. But it never goes out of its way to say what happens to him. Does he die? Does he ascend to a higher plane of existence? Become some kind of god? Yeah, probably. Here's the thing. You can dig into details of this, like when does this transformation happen to Goku? Is it when he absorbs the Dragon Balls? Is it when Shenlong's eyes glow like he's granting a wish? Is it when Goku's lying in the crater and subsequently becomes invincible? The specifics are iffy, but you can't really answer, does Goku ascend to a higher plane of existence, with anything other than, yeah, probably. It certainly isn't no. Sometimes it's impossible for me to not relate what I'm currently reviewing in Dragon Ball Dissection to what I'm currently watching for the first time in my real life. And nowhere does a comparison happen to be more on the nose than here. Characters who resolve a story by ascending to godhood and effecting huge and sometimes cryptic changes on the world around them? Yeah, that's the ending to Madoka. Lately, that series has been leaving me with a lot of sleepless nights. From metaphysical logistics to the complexity of the intertwining motives between fleshed out characters to endlessly debating whether or not Homura did anything wrong. That's a series that leaves a lot for a viewer to chew on in the best ways. The ending to Dragon Ball GT is not that. There's no real deep meaning here, and it does little to further a character arc. It's not particularly complex. It's just purposely vague. Did Goku become a god? Yeah, probably. Before you think I'm poo-pooing this, stop. I'm not doing that at all. Do I think Dragon Ball GT's ending is as good as Madoka's? No, don't be silly. But as much as I'd like Dragon Ball to be a bit more character and story focused, I don't think Dragon Ball doing a mind-bending, reality-warping, psychologically tormenting ending would be at all in line with what it is. Goku vaguely ascending to heaven, or enlightenment, or Dragonland amusement park isn't really supposed to be a brain-teasing puzzle. It's supposed to be an emotionally satisfying way for the audience to say goodbye to Son Goku. And from that perspective, it's probably better to be vague. It's not about the bespoke mechanics of figuring out the exact moment that Goku dies or ascends or whatever. That's stuff that kids can debate on the playground, but it's not the truth of the piece. The truth is getting to spend one more moment with your friends, treasuring the memories of a lost loved one, being reminded that your memories are always with you. Those are the simple ideas the show is trying to convey. Dragon Ball GT is giving its characters the same kind of experience the viewers are probably going through, which helps those events to resonate with the viewers. Getting bogged down in the logistical facts would overshadow the far more important emotional truth. And that's fine. All that said, I think the biggest talking point regarding the ending of GT is that it is an ending, and Dragon Ball has had an ending before, and those two endings are very different. Therefore, it's natural to compare the two and certainly worth doing. The most notable difference between Toriyama's ending and Toei's ending is that the former is what I would consider an open ending, while the latter is what I would consider a closed ending. If Dragon Ball continued with a chapter 520, it'd be easy to have it pick up with Goku and Oob making it to Oob's house, and it could play out like any other Dragon Ball arc. Continuing after GT's ending requires accepting huge changes to the core identity of the narrative. In other words, it provides a sense of finality. That's what appeals to people who perhaps didn't care for Dragon Ball's ending. Granted, if they're favorably comparing it to Dragon Ball Z's version of that ending, I can see why, as that interpretation purposely downplays any sense of closure in favor of hyping up Dragon Ball GT. In fact, Dragon Ball GT's ending literally takes the end from Toriyama's ending, which Dragon Ball Z had skipped over, and places it here. That's certainly fair because Oob wasn't the end of the animated story. This is. But it certainly makes that divide even more distinct for finality-minded fans. I'm not going to get into that again, I covered that when I covered that ending. Regarding GT's ending, at no point do I go, "Ooh, that ending was what the whole series was building towards and made everything worth it." Nor do I go, "Ugh, that ending ruined everything I liked about the series." And unless an ending is either of those things, I don't really care. I think it's fair to say that outside of those kinds of circumstances wherein I will care a lot, a story is far more about the journey than the destination. GT's ending certainly doesn't ruin anything for me. It's not systematically undoing every interesting element of The Last Jedi in favor of the safe and familiar Star Wars beats. It doesn't hit me with a mood whiplash thud by undoing Sailor Venus' spoilers without any emotional weight. But I also don't consider it much of a payoff. Despite the fact that those in charge have said that they envisioned Dragon Ball GT ending this way, the arc that leads to it feels so empty and vacuous that the ending could have been anything. It works. It works fine. The Dragon Ball franchise ends with Son Goku becoming awesome and special? Makes sense to me. The Dragon Ball franchise ends with the titular Dragon Balls bidding the characters adieu? That fits. I can't really say much more than that. Like I said a few minutes ago, it accomplishes providing a scenario where the viewer gets to say goodbye to Goku. I think that's why even people who don't care about Dragon Ball GT like this ending, even preferring it to Toriyama's. It doesn't really matter what the context is, it gives people that emotional release, the feeling that this is special, and not just any other episode. Given all that, I have a hard time deciding which ending I prefer. As different as they are, the individual elements of the Buu arc's ending and the Evil Dragon arc's ending are the same thing, just in two different flavors. Goku leaves in both of them. Do you prefer the open adventure flavor or the becomes magic flavor? Do you prefer an ending where everything's going to be okay because of the Dragon Balls, or an ending where the Dragon Balls are literally taken away? Do you prefer an ending where Pan is sad her grandpa's gone when she's a preschooler, or when she's approaching adolescence? Hey, in 2024, just having a Dragon Ball story with a definitive ending is a glorious novelty in and of itself. But putting those comparisons side by side, I can also see how GT's ending might be infuriating on principle. It really does look like it's trying to thematically undercut everything Toriyama's ending does. Assert that it can do the same thing better. But given that Toriyama's ending doesn't have much of a message beyond a good-natured shrug and a smiling assurance that the story goes on, I struggle to take offense to GT's follow-up. That's not because I disagree with Toriyama's message, but because I can't help but see the reality that, even with that ending, change is inevitable at some point. Dragon Ball is built on change. Just because things don't irrevocably change here, doesn't mean they won't here. Because of that, I accept both of them for what they are. Sometimes I prefer one flavor and sometimes another, but I like both. I'm glad that GT is able to bring the feels, is able to add an iconic moment to the franchise. So, the Evil Dragon arc. I've already said quite a bit about this, but let me try to sum it up. It's a premise with so much potential, through which so little is done. Let me be clear, I don't hate this. Every time I start watching it, I'm excited for at least the first few episodes because the premise is so fun. However, it feels like a story arc carried out through the path of least resistance. Conceptually, it digs deeper into underlying principles that have always existed in the series, but to carry out said concept of consequence in history, it goes with a format that is largely consequenceless. That fascinates me. Morishita Kozo has said that they realized early on that simply having Goku, Trunks, and Pan hop from planet to planet was never going to be satisfying. Because of that, they ended up restructuring the story around the machine mutants and Baby. I would think the lesson there would be obvious, that a story needs a larger degree of cohesion and narrative thrust. Apparently, though, the lesson they took from that is that planet adventures are bad, because this arc falls into the exact same trap of random episodic fluff. They just seem to think it doesn't matter because this time the episodes are about fighting instead of adventure, and we all know that that's all that Dragon Ball fans care about. Yeah, it's obvious in hindsight that that's the lesson they learned. In a way, this arc is doing me a favor because it helps prove what I've said all along. What happens when Dragon Ball is literally only concerned with fighting, to the complete exclusion of story and character? Well, you get Yi Shenlong. Episodic storytelling is fine, and for Dragon Ball it's always pretty novel when it crops up. I don't even mind the evil dragons being used primarily as standard evil thugs. But if they're not going to be characters, somebody has to be. Even if you look at Sentai or Power Rangers, which both use the same formula, where the monsters aren't typically characters and the individual installments are largely episodic, they still do more than this. In Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, who cares about Madame Woe? She's just an obstacle to facilitate timid Billy saving his kidnapped girlfriend. In its Zyuranger equivalent, it's about Saori learning to be courageous. They're incredibly simple, and you might not care for them, but they're about something. Here, Goku, Pan, and Giru just bop around doing the same thing every single time. They don't interact in meaningful ways, they don't learn, they don't grow, they don't get any chance to surprise us. Goku teases Pan, Pan smacks Giru around. It's all the same stuff. Again, that's why Liu Shenlong's episode is the closest this story arc comes to at least nailing the standards of an episodic narrative. Pan meets a boy her own age, which gives her something new to play off of. They develop some kind of rapport, I guess. This series opens with a boy rejecting Pan because he's an idiot loser crybaby who's intimidated by her amazing talents. Here's a boy who actually appreciates her abilities and wants to learn them himself. Maybe Pan can be herself around her peer group without being ostracized. And all that might very well be a coincidence, but it's literally the only thing this story arc does with her character. The bar is literally that low that I have to praise an episode for getting the bare minimum kind of right. Then she's unceremoniously taken out of the story to be a vague rescue doll, and then to stand around in the background. This story ends with Goku choosing to leave with Shenlong, and I don't mind the vagaries of that ending. But what does this story do with Goku up to that point? Nothing. He's just the hero guy. He's fun. He's entertaining. But he also feels largely disconnected outside of the external stimuli. It's business as usual, not anything to suggest that Goku is making this his final adventure. That's probably why I'm so hard on Su and San Shenlong. They're the only elements in this story that even try to be about anything. Finally, some characters are going to bring some ideas to the table, and then it's just, and ugh. It appears to me that the Evil Dragon arc is a microcosm of the Baby arc. They both start out lighthearted and episodic, only to shift focus to dire action. The characters who headline at the beginning are tossed out in favor of Goku. Vegeta starts out the stories absent, but then comes into sharp focus by the end. Bluma creates a machine to transform Vegeta. They both abound in logistics that don't make any sense. The somehow for some reason phenomenon, as I coined it last year. I can appreciate seeing a show go through growing pains, but this arc seems to just hit the reset button so it can go through learning all the same lessons again. However, the Baby arc goes through those motions with much more care and ambition and creativity. Its sloppiness is part of its charm. It carves out a unique niche within the Dragon Ball world. Here, all those elements feel rote, routine, empty. This is certainly not the epic trash fire that is the Super Number 17 arc, but it doesn't come close to approaching the high water mark of the Baby arc. Dragon Ball GT is so fascinating to me. Having immersed myself in it for 2 years, I can easily say it has fallen somewhat in my estimation. That's neither to say that I thought it was amazing before or terrible now, but Dragon Ball GT is like a lot of things that look nicer the farther away you are from them. Goku cursed to be a child? Love it! A trip through space to collect Dragon Balls? Great! A bioweapon draining energy from a cult to exact revenge on Saiyans? Amazing! The Dragon Balls turn evil? Fantastic! And I wish I could leave it there, feeling as warm and fuzzy as that Super Saiyan 4 fur. But then I think about Baby's ludicrous origin, Pon's absolutely wasted potential, a stupid dragon, and practically everything to do with Super Number 17. Dragon Ball GT is not the first Dragon Ball entity to contain lots of disappointing or underwhelming elements, and it's certainly not going to be the last. It suffers from a lot of the same flaws that plague original Dragon Ball, but for the most part both the highs and lows seem lower. I opened this era of Dragon Ball Dissection by asking, what is GT? And what it is this. All of this. Is it as bad as its detractors claim? No. Is it as good as those who love it claim? Also no. It's a weird little coda to Dragon Ball, kind of like The Godfather Part 3. If you're already a Dragon Ball fan, I'd at least recommend the first 40 episodes, and I suppose the special as well. They're just weird and ambitious enough to be uniquely enjoyable. I can't really recommend the rest. Maybe skip ahead to the final episode? Sometimes weirdly enjoyable, sometimes tediously infuriating. That's Dragon Ball GT. Dragon Ball GT's conclusion at the end of 1997 marked the end of the weekly Dragon Ball series, knocking it out of the time slot the franchise had held for nearly 12 uninterrupted years. Interestingly, that slot would be filled by a new Dr. Slump series, bringing that slot full circle to where it began, as Dragon Ball had once inherited it from that series. It would be over 11 years before a new Dragon Ball series returned to the airwaves, and even that was a re-edited Dragon Ball Z. The next time a new weekly series would emerge would be nearly 18 years after Dragon Ball GT. So what's next for us? Well, for the foreseeable future, there's still a lot of Dragon Ball content even before the 21st Century Revival era. From spin-offs like Nekomajin or Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, to adaptations like the live-action films of various countries, there is so much to explore. But I can't do it without your help. If you think Dragon Ball Dissection should review something, let me know. And also, let me know where I can access those things, especially considering a lot of the interregnum material is less widely available than what's typically considered the core of the franchise. I largely know what pieces I want to talk about, but I could be missing some, so let me know. As of right now, I don't want to make any decisions about Dragon Ball Super because that's a big commitment. As I got closer to the end of the original manga, I said I would take on Dragon Ball GT only if I could afford to do so. And you all rose to the occasion. Thank you. But Dragon Ball GT is not the most popular thing in the world, and my income and views have been steadily tapering off over the past 2 years. I hate talking about it. It really makes me uncomfortable. This is not a pledge drive. It's simply the economic reality that I have to face. As I always say, no matter what happens, I feel lucky I've gotten to do this at all. But there's also a lot of Dragon Ball material I do look forward to getting to talk about if I have the chance. So all of that is going to be part of my decision-making process as I play it by ear and continue forward. But I'd be remiss not to celebrate all of you who have stuck by me and been so generous. And that leads directly to our first stop on this exploration of a post-GT pre-Super world. A while ago, I posted a goal that, when reached, would see me reviewing Toriyama's 2 Dragon Ball prototypes. Well, longtime patron Leaf Blady went absolutely above and beyond to ensure I hit that goal, and he's been patiently waiting for months now for me to get to the end of GT and do it. So in a way, you could call this the first sponsored episode of Dragon Ball Dissection, as next time we explore Dragon Boy and the Adventure of Tongpu. You can't get more OGDB than that. But I'm going to need a little bit of time to prepare as well as to catch up on my Dragon Ball Daima delinquency. So January is going to be a month devoted exclusively to Dragon Ball Daima. Somehow, someway, I'm going to cover every episode I've missed as well as the ones that continue to come out. I hope you look forward to it. 2024 has been a year, but in it I have produced some of my favorite videos. Obviously, I've had a great time finishing up Dragon Ball GT, and I covered 2 arcs in a single year? That hasn't happened since 2014. Thanks, GT! But I also did a whole series on live-action Sailor Moon, which are among the videos I'm most proud of and had the most fun with. I think my Donkey Kong 64 video turned out great, and the numbers back it up. And my highest viewed video of the year was my Dragon Ball Attack Names video. I created a record-setting 35 videos this year. It's been a lot of fun. I have a lot planned for next year, and I hope you enjoy what I'm cooking up. Remember that outside of this month, a new video comes out every other Monday. Thanks so much for celebrating Dragon Ball Dissection December with me once again. It's been a blast for me, and I hope it has been for you too. I will see you next time. It sure is too bad that I'm never going to cover Dragon Ball GT.